Sup everyone. If you watched my video on my favorite anime shows of 2025, then you know that I have high praise for Takopi's Original Sin. It's a really short series, it's only 6 episodes long, but it's extremely well done. As in, it's one of the very, very best anime shows I've ever seen. Takopi's Original Sin is one of the only anime series I've ever seen that I would give a 10 out of 10 to. It's also very hard to watch at times. Takopi's Original Sin is a show about suicide and child abuse. It's a show about a character, a young girl named Shizuka, who is on the verge of killing herself. And right before she attempts it, she discovers a cute, octopus-looking alien named Takopi, who spends the whole show trying to prevent her death. And needless to say, this is one of the darkest, saddest anime shows you could ever see. It is not a show that you should try to watch if you're not in the right headspace for it. The series even begins with a content warning, and it's warranted in this instance. You should know what you're getting into if you watch this. But if you can handle it, I think you should watch this. The reason I think this show deserves extra attention is that there's very little art that exists that manages to properly capture what it's like to not just be depressed, but suicidally depressed, in a way that feels real. It's very rare that you can actually identify with someone on screen who is legitimately on the verge of ending their own life. And that's largely because there's relatively little art that's actually willing to tackle this topic in a prolonged, dedicated way, let alone well. We don't like talking about suicide. It's not fun subject matter to talk about. In fact, I'm sure some of you watching this are contemplating clicking out of this video right now because that's how uncomfortable it is to dwell on this topic. But because we don't like talking about this is why there's a stigma about this, and why people often don't know how to talk to people who have really bad depression, because they don't know what it's like to be severely depressed. And at the same time, it's why there are very few frames of reference in pop culture that people who are suicidally depressed can look to and see themselves in. People look at The Catcher in the Rye sometimes and they think, why has this book resonated so much with people? This book is not that well written and its plot isn't amazing, so why has this random book endured so much? And the answer is that there's not much else competing with it. There's a vicious cycle at play, because only someone who knows what it's like to be suicidally depressed can create art about depression and trauma in a way that's authentic. But if someone is sincerely dealing with those things, they, logically, might not be well enough to ever make that art. And then even if they can, people usually don't want to see stuff like this. People usually balk at stuff like this. And so, as a society, great examinations about suicidal tendencies are just incredibly rare on the whole. You can go years at a time without seeing something in the mainstream that focuses on being suicidal as realistically as this anime show does. But that's why I think Takopi's Original Sin is commendable and worth discussing, because I believe it does as good a job of broaching these topics as anything I've ever seen. And to explain how and why I think it does this so well, I've compiled a list of 5 ways in which depression and trauma are depicted in this series that I admired because I found them to be true to life. And because this series is so short, I'm going to be giving regular spoilers for the show in my analysis. So if you want to watch this show before listening to my dissection of it, now is the time to pause this video and do so. And I actually recommend doing so because, again, it's only 6 episodes long, thankfully. It'd be harder to take in a higher dosage of this. And I will warn you that I'm going to be explicitly discussing very heavy subject matter from here on out. And so, if that's not something that appeals to you, I get it. And you can go watch a different video essay I've made or something instead. But at the same time, I also believe it is important to discuss topics like this at least once in a while, because never discussing it, I believe, can be harmful, and that it's actually better as a society for us to normalize some of this so that people who are dealing with this know that they're not alone in doing so, and so that people who aren't familiar with this don't have quite as much of a blind spot and are in a better position to potentially help someone. Maybe. Alright, so number 1, I like that they show how trauma gets passed down in this show. In Takopi's Original Sin, the villain of the series, at first glance, is Marina, who is a classmate of Shizuka's. And Marina is a monstrous person in the present, who devotes her life to tormenting Shizuka. She physically assaults her, she verbally assaults her, she destroys her belongings, and she even goes so far as to get her dog killed. She is as loathsome a character as you're ever gonna see in anime. She is literally the primary reason Shizuka kills herself. And yet, what the anime does is show that Marina herself was also being abused by her parents, and that the reason she's bullying this emotionally traumatized person in Shizuka is because she too has been emotionally traumatized and is taking it out on her. And to add even more depth, the anime then shows that Shizuka herself, in the present, beyond being suicidal, is also a very flawed person, morally. She encourages Azuma, a classmate of hers who is the only other main character in the show, to do bad things for her. She asks him to steal for her. She asks him to take the fall for her when Marina gets killed. And she even speaks openly about violently harming other people later in the series. And she herself physically assaults Takopi at times towards the end. And I found all of this to be daring because a lesser show would have left Marina as a one-dimensional evil caricature for the sake of moving the plot forward, and would have depicted Shizuka as a totally perfect person to emphasize just how horrible it is that all of this was happening to her. But that's not what this show did. Instead, it shows that Marina is a victim too, and is putting her trauma out into the world, and that Shizuka, from her abuse, is also beginning to do the same thing. And so, there's a cycle here that the show wants you to be aware of. It wants you to recognize that the real villain of this show is actually the forces at play that have put all of this into motion. That this is the adults' fault more than anything. That these kids' parents and some of their teachers have failed them to such a degree and have harmed them to such a degree that they are now taking it out on each other. The show wants you to recognize that all of this pain that is being caused did not generate out of nowhere, and that pain doesn't merely stop when it reaches someone. It then stretches out to the people around them too, and then it just keeps branching off and extending and going further and further to more people. And to highlight this, I thought it was very clever that they show that the insanely mean things that Marina says to Shizuka when she's tormenting her are the exact same insults that she witnessed her dad lob at her mom when she sees her dad mistreating her mom. And that it's because her dad mistreats her mom that her mom mistreats her, and so on. Takopi's Original Sin presents a rather nuanced take on trauma and abuse. I think that when you look at the subject matter of this show from the outside, you might think that a lot of what the show is putting on screen might be gratuitous, that it's extreme for the sake of being extreme, is just trying to shock you and get a cheap rise out of you. But there's a purpose to all of this, and that purpose is to illustrate that if someone is a bad person in the present, it might be because they were shaped into being a bad person, and that whether or not someone is a well-adjusted member of society often comes down to their environment, and that if you took some of the happiest or most successful people in the world and went back in time and placed them as a kid in a household where they were getting abused all the time, they wouldn't be the person that they are right now, because their life would have been exponentially harder. And to me, it's very important to look at people in a three-dimensional light like this, because people are more complicated than simply being naturally good or naturally bad. Marina, in this story, is a terrible person in the present time. She's a monster. But you come to appreciate that she became a monster, and that for all we know, she might be the end result of a long line of trauma and abuse. And that while that doesn't excuse her actions in any way, you can at least understand part of how she got to this point. The second way that I liked how depression and trauma were depicted in this show, I liked that they show that Shizuka was in a bad place even before Marina started tormenting her. You see these brief flashbacks and explanations about Shizuka's past in the show. And what's revealed is that even before Marina came into the picture, Shizuka was living a very hard life. They explain that her mom and dad fought around her, that her dad abandoned her and doesn't even care about her. They show that her mom is negligent to the point of being completely indifferent to her. And they show that Shizuka has never had any friends, and they explain that she was already getting bullied even when she was younger. And the reason I thought this was good is because, as someone who has familiarity with all this, I generally look at being suicidal as the culmination of years and years of buildup, in which you accumulate so much trauma and get so bogged down by depression that it eventually starts to warp you. It starts to weigh you down. It starts to poison you and bleed into how you go about life and your ability to be the person that you want to be. And when people attempt to kill themselves in real life, that's not a flippant decision that they've made. That is something that they have only done because their pain has become so unbearable that they think it's the most viable option left. And in regard to this story, it would have been very simple to set it up so that Shizuka's life was wonderful until Marina came into the picture, and that Marina was 100% responsible for Shizuka being suicidal. But that's not what they did. They established that Shizuka was carrying a burden for years leading up to the present time, and that while Marina had undoubtedly become the primary driver of Shizuka's suffering, the seeds of her one day trying to kill herself had actually been planted years earlier, and that what Marina was doing was supercharging and magnifying the suffering that Shizuka had already been dealing with. And the reason I really appreciated this is because it has always bothered me that in movies and TV shows, when characters go to commit suicide, their decision to kill themselves is often painted as something that they decided in like the blink of an eye. That they just woke up one day and suddenly went, well, it's time to be suicidal. And I hate that because it lends to the perception that people sometimes have that committing suicide is selfish, and that to kill yourself is to purposefully inconvenience and devastate the people around you. People on the outside often view committing suicide as a choice that someone has rationally made, when that is the furthest thing from the case. No one wants to be suicidal. No one chooses to be suicidal. To be suicidal is a culmination. It is to have your mind be so ravaged with so much pain for so long, whatever long is to them, that life becomes hard to live. And so, whenever a movie or a show depicts a main character being suicidal without also contextualizing that they must have endured a mountain of pain or discomfort over some extended period of time first, they are not depicting what it's like to actually be suicidally depressed. And that's why I like that in Takopi's Original Sin, even though Shizuka is a very young character, they go out of their way to show that the foundation of her one day harming herself was actually laid a very long time ago, and that while she wouldn't be in the horrible situation she was in without Marina abusing her, the experiences she had had before Marina was even in the picture were a contributing factor too, and a significant one. Number 3, I like that they show that you can become traumatized by someone without actually being physically hurt, or even intentionally hurt. So, Azuma is an interesting character in this show, in that unlike Shizuka and Marina, he is not being physically abused by someone near him. His mom is not physically injuring him, and is not intentionally set out to make his life terrible. And yet, we learn that through her parenting style, his mom has basically ruined his ability to live a happy life. She has robbed him of all self-confidence and made him hate himself by constantly telling him how much better his brother is than him, even though, by any normal metric, he's an incredibly good student too, and someone she should also be proud of. Through her actions, Azuma's mom has made him dedicate his entire life to trying to impress her. And the reason he goes so far to try to help Shizuka, to the point of it negatively impacting him, is because she resembles his mom, and he feels a sense of obligation to help her, no matter what. And all of this, I found, was a good addition to the show because it illustrates that even if you're not enduring the worst possible pain, even if you're not getting regularly beaten up or being pushed to the point of suicide, you could still very well also be enduring an emotional pain that is wrecking your life. Azuma is objectively in a much better position in the present than Shizuka or Marina. His life is not in immediate danger in the ways that theirs are. And yet, his quality of life is also really, really bad. And to me, that's an important thing to keep in mind because pain is pain. And just because someone might be going through something worse than you or on another level than you, for the sake of argument, that doesn't mean that you're not also dealing with something that's really bad and hurting you. It doesn't mean that your pain isn't valid. And I think that's crucial to take from this because the line between whether or not you need help is not whether or not you're suicidal. You might be in no danger of harming yourself, and you might not be experiencing any suicidal ideation whatsoever, but you might still be in a really bad place. And so I think it's good to have it in the show that even a person who's not in a household that's unsafe for them can still be in a really bad situation. And that sometimes it's not clear or obvious to other people that someone is even hurting. Sometimes people will have no idea that a person they're close to is struggling with something. Sometimes people can be financially flourishing and romantically flourishing and living a life that most people would think is great and still be dealing with a horrible, horrible, horrible depression. And that's why everybody's default should just be to be nice and chill to everybody, because you never know what someone is dealing with. Just because someone's scars aren't as prominent or decipherable as someone else's doesn't mean they're not also there. Number 4, I like that Takopi is not able to save Shizuka without the help of a deus ex machina. This is a tricky point to try to articulate, but sometimes you're not going to be able to single-handedly save someone when they're in a situation that's this bad. If you've already watched the show or read the manga this was based on, I want you to think about how amazing Takopi is. In this story, he is set up to be the greatest possible helper imaginable outside of the enormous but well-intentioned mistakes he makes. He is endlessly kind, he is endlessly patient, he is willing to redo things a countless number of times to make things better for Shizuka. He's always right next to her, he's always helping her, he's never fighting with her, never saying anything mean to her, even when she is hurting him. And on top of all of that, he has all of these incredible, magical items at his disposal, and he is willing to use all of them for her sake. And yet, even with all of that, this perfect guardian angel alien octopus can't find a way to steer her from her course. And things only substantially improve for Shizuka after he accidentally kills Marina. And to me, that was this story's way of making it clear that suicidal depression is not something to be taken lightly, and not something that can be dispelled easily. This goes back to what I said earlier about people often not respecting or understanding what it means to be going through something like this. A lot of people who don't have depression believe that people can fix their depression as easily as they can fix, like, a sprained ankle or something. That all you gotta do is take some medication, or go to the gym, or talk to a therapist, or do some meditating, and so on, and by God, you'll be totally fine. But the thing is, that's not how it works universally. And please understand that this is not me saying, don't do those things are a waste of time, because they're not a waste of time. Those things, all those things I just mentioned, can help, and you owe it to yourself to try what you can to get yourself in the best state of mind possible. But sometimes those things don't cure depression. Sometimes your depression never fully goes away, and the best thing you can do is try to manage it and navigate around it. And this series personifies that. I love that at the very end of this show, in the very last scene, when they do a future cut, they show that Marina has a scar on her face from her mom that she hadn't gotten yet in the present time of the story. And that scar is meant to indicate that even in this best case scenario ending, in which Shizuka has not committed suicide and Marina doesn't hate her, Marina has still had to deal with abuse, which illustrates that even though things are way better for them in this ending, they're still not in a perfect place, and that Takopi couldn't completely erase their pain. I love that at the end of the day, even with the outcome that Takopi creates, there was no perfect solution for everybody here. And I'm not saying that to sound nihilistic. I'm saying that because it's important for people to recognize the gravity of dealing with this kind of thing and what an uphill climb it can be to actually treat this sometimes. The first step to actually helping someone who is legitimately going through something like this is to recognize that the solution to their problems is probably not simple and probably not something that can be done quickly. Depression is hard, man. If it was easy to get rid of severe depression, if it was simple to move past severe trauma, no one would be depressed. Everyone would be happy all the time. The reason a show like this exists in the first place is because that's not the case. And while we should all have the aspiration of wanting to help people as much as we possibly can, I think this show is a good case study for what the limitations are to what you might be able to do. If this magical creature with magical items and infinite patience struggled to save someone, it makes sense that a regular person in the same situation might struggle to do the same thing too. And number 5, I like that Takopi, even when he was failing to fix Shizuka, was still able to help her a little bit. This is something that's very easy to overlook in the show, because the show lays out the danger and risks of trying to help someone who is dealing with suicidal depression. They establish that Takopi, in trying to lift her spirits, was actually, unintentionally, the reason she was able to commit suicide, by giving her an object in which she could do it with. And towards the end of the show, Takopi even apologizes to her for not taking enough time to learn what her mindset was and what she was exactly going through. Which is a good thing to be in the show, because if you have any experience with people who are very depressed, you know that people who are very depressed tend to be very sensitive, and that you need to be very careful and very respectful if you're trying to reach them. And yet, even though Takopi makes these mistakes, and even though he laments his inability to save her, and even calls himself a failure, it's worth remembering that outside of his mistakes, Takopi was improving her livelihood with his actions, and that Shizuka appreciated that. She tells Takopi that because of all the things he was doing for her, her life had gotten better and wasn't quite as hard as it was before. And Marina, when Takopi was with her, said the same thing to him. And I think that is a crucial thing to be interpreted, because if you know someone in real life who is going through something terrible, the odds that you, as their friend or acquaintance, will be able to single-handedly alleviate them of all their pain and suffering solely through your assistance is essentially zero. And that by trying to micromanage someone's life and trying to fix them for them, you could actually do a lot of harm to them by accident. But what you can do is you can be there for them and help lift them up. And that might be all you're able to do, but merely being able to do that is a lot and is worth pursuing. Sometimes people who are hurting just want someone they can rely on and who they feel is looking out for them. Sometimes basic acts of kindness and friendliness can be infinitely more effective than spewing a bunch of therapeutic advice at someone or trying to dictate how someone lives. Something I kept thinking about as I was watching this show was that part of the reason Shizuka was in this position in the first place was because she was being horrifically bullied, to the point that her desk and her backpack were always vandalized. And yet, none of the kids in her class, other than Azuma, did anything for her or cared about her at all. And Shizuka had every reason to think that she was alone in the world. And so, for all the magic that was being used to try to help her by Takopi, if she had merely had like one or two classmates who were friendly with her and who were looking out for her, that could have made all the difference in the world. What Shizuka needed wasn't a bunch of magical items. What she needed was people and companionship. And that's where Takopi made a positive difference, by always being there for her. And all of this is easier said than done, because when you become severely depressed, part of what comes with the territory is self-isolation. But if you can break through that barrier, it can, again, make all the difference in the world. And I think the fact that this show goes out of its way to twice highlight that Shizuka and Marina appreciated what Takopi was doing for them, despite all the ways that he was failing to transform their lives, is there to let you know that you shouldn't look at helping someone as being an all or nothing thing. Just because you might not be able to radically improve someone's life in one swoop doesn't mean you can't still make it a little bit better, and that it's totally worth it to try to make someone's life a little bit better. Because in the same way that pain can add up, so can good things. So, there you go. And I only have two things left to say before I wrap up this video. The first is just, in general, if any of what I talked about hit close to home for you, I just want to say, hang in there. I, the digital voice that you're hearing right now, care about you and want things to turn out well for you. Unless you're like a serial killer or something, in which case, turn yourself in. And the second thing I'll say is that Takopi's Original Sin personifies why I love anime so much. Because the beauty of anime is that you can do so many different things in it. Sometimes when people talk about why they don't like anime, they'll say that they don't like anime because they equate anime with just being a bunch of fighting shows. They'll go like, well, I don't like things like One Piece, and I don't like things like Naruto, so it's not for me. But the thing is, anime can be a lot of things, and it can be things that it can't naturally be in other mediums. There are anime shows about people who get reincarnated as vending machines. There are anime shows about Chicago gangsters during the Prohibition era. You can do basically everything in anime. And while Those aforementioned fighting shows might get more attention than something like Takopi's Original Sin. This show gets to exist too, and that's a wonderful thing, because whether something like this interests you or not, I also think it's important that there's a place in the world for something like this. I don't throw this word around lightly, but I honestly think Takopi's Original Sin is a masterpiece in terms of how well it covers heavy subject matter. And in a world in which anime and manga don't exist, this story doesn't get to exist. And I'm happy it does, as ironic as that might be.